Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Success with Soul podcast. It is Kate, your host, and I am joined here today with Rachel from Team KK. Rachel is our program coordinator extraordinaire. She joined the team a few months ago and has made everything better since then. We're so glad Rachel is here today, and we're here together because we're going to be talking about how to sell a service-based business, which both of us have some experience with. As y'all know, most likely, I sold Root Revel, my blog, at the end of 2021. And Rachel has also sold a business that she owned in the past. So before we dive into the topic at hand, I'd love to just have you introduce yourself to everyone and tell us a little bit more about your entrepreneurial journey.
Sure. Thanks, Kate. Thank you so much for having me on Success with Soul today. So like Kate shared, my name is Rachel Silvis, and I'm the program coordinator here on Team KK. And I have a little bit of a different experience coming in as an entrepreneur. I actually kind of fell into it where I graduated college, was kind of working a quote unquote regular job. And then my supervisor or my co-manager at the time was like, I'm going to start my own business. Do you want to come with me? And I felt like it was the time in my life. I was like in my early 20s. I didn't have kids yet. I was like, okay, if I'm going to take a risk, sounds like a good time to do it. And so I kind of ended up getting into being an entrepreneur. Like I said, I kind of fell into it. And then I ended up running that service-based business for over 10 years. I fell into it. I loved it. I purchased another business that I ended up running for 5 years. And then I started my own coaching business. So it kind of just, as you all know, snowballed a little bit. And I fell in love with being my own boss and the ideas and all the fun things that come with the entrepreneur journey. So I'd say overall, I think I have about 15 years experience as an entrepreneur in 3 different businesses. And I am super excited to be part of Team KK now.
I didn't realize you had also bought and sold a business in the past.
Correct.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. So I know we're going to talk about Root Revel too. So we're just going to kind of be flipping the script on each other here. Tell us about how did you know it was time to you bought a business first, or you started a business first and then you bought another business?
Correct. I started a business first, and then I had the opportunity to buy another business that was it was like a natural product making business where I made like soap and lotion and sold it at craft fairs, and kind of a more hobby business.
Yeah.
So I had the opportunity to buy that business as well.
Okay. And so that's really cool. So that was a more product-based business. And then
Correct.
The business that you sold was service-based. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I was in the social service sector, and in the service industry, we helped people with disabilities get jobs in our community. And I ran that business for over 10 years. And I think I realized that just as things were evolving, I still loved the work that my company was doing, but I was ready to just make a career change personally. And so I'll ask you the same question, Kate, but it just felt like the right time to go a different direction in my personal life and in my career. And I felt like that my business partner and I had built up something that was so valuable for our community that I didn't just want to see it end when I wanted to transition out of it. And so I think that was, I just knew it was the right time for me. I don't know. I'd love to flip that question back to you and have you share a little bit about Root Revel and how you knew it was the right time to sell that business.
Yeah. Super similar. And I mean, just for anybody who doesn't know the full story, the short version is, I started Root Revel as a holistic wellness blog in 2015. And when I started it, I had no intention of ever selling it. I didn't even know that was something people could do. I thought if this works, this is what I want to do forever. And so I say that just because I do think there's a mindset a mindset shift that happens once you get into the space of really knowing that you can buy and sell businesses and websites and things like that, that it makes you approach your next thing very differently, at least for me. And so anyway, I started the Root Revel blog and I loved it. And it served, as they say, it served every purpose it needed to in my life. And it was a great season for me for, 6 years. But around maybe 4.5 years in, I kind of just started feeling a little bit bored, a little bit kind of feel like I've said what I wanted to say about this topic. I don't really have that much left to add. There were some things that I was having, that had kind of become problematic, where like a lot of my early posts were about the anti-inflammatory diet. And then I really became more into intuitive eating and very anti-diet and anti-wellness diet. And so it felt really kind of out of integrity in some ways to have this site that was promoting a way of eating that's outside of your own like internal knowing and trusting your body and that kind of thing. So we worked for a while trying to like remove that as much as we could, but it's a business also. And a lot of our top posts, like the posts that were bringing in the most traffic from Google and things like that, were some of those posts. So by removing them, we were losing traffic. And so sometimes it was like hard to manage whether or not we wanted, what was more important. Like we can't have a business if we don't have the traffic, but we want to be talking about things that feel, in integrity and authentic. So that was a part of it. At the same time, I had my first baby, and then I had another baby, and then I had a third baby, which was launching the Six Figure Blog Academy. And so I had started doing some courses, and I just really loved teaching. I always kind of wanted to be a teacher, but never really wanted the teacher salary and like working with kids. So I prefer working with adults. And once I started doing that, I really loved kind of coaching and consulting in that way and teaching other people how to do something. And that business just really took off. And I just kind of felt like I needed to follow my heart into what the next thing was. There was a lot of other, like anything, I feel like there was a million little things that went into it. So those are some of the biggest ones. We've talked before about EAT, expertise, authoritativeness, trustworthiness on this podcast before, and certainly a lot inside the incubator, which is really important for SEO. And that was another piece where I felt like I didn't have medical credentials. I wasn't a dietitian or a nutritionist. It was not even that it felt. Google was basically saying, if you don't have these things, then we're not going to send traffic your way anymore. And so I needed to either go to med school or, hire a doctor to medically review things. And I just didn't feel like, that's where I wanted to spend my time. So I was thinking like I would just have to walk away. And I remember I was in a mastermind, and it was the very beginning of 2020. So before the pandemic. And I was just kind of sharing with my friends in there, like, I don't know what to do. I'm kind of burnt out, isn't quite the right word, but I'm just kind of like over Root and Revel, and I want the next thing. But how do I just walk away from this multiple six-figure business? And they're like, well, you don't, you sell it. And it just was this light bulb, like, what? I could sell it? What do you mean? So it was a very long process. It took me, I'm very curious to hear what the process was like for you too. Like it took me a year and a half to sell it. And part of that time I didn't even have it listed. I was like preparing it for sale. So the blog was so focused on me as a persona. So it was really like removing me from it as much as I could. And there were lots of other things to do to kind of just get it ready for sale. Then I listed it for sale, ended up working with a couple different brokers. Ultimately did end up finding, it was one of those things like I got 0 offers in 9 or 10 months. And I said, all right, if this thing doesn't sell by the end of the year, I think I am just going to have to walk away from it. And I kind of had this surrender moment, like, I give it over to you, universe. I've done everything I can. I'm unattached from the outcome. And I got 3 offers in 1 week and ended up going with one of them. And a couple months later, it was a done deal.
I think that's interesting that you shared some of that, Kate, because I also had that like light bulb moment when my business, because I owned it with a business partner. So as we were talking about kind of both of us feeling like we are ready to move on and we are talking about closing the business down, I was actually the one that was like, well, hey, like, what if we sell it? What if we sell it? And I think that just even having that thought, I think is just something like, if you have a business, that's something that you should be open to in the future, is being able to sell your business and just being open to that possibility of it being valuable and it's serving a need in your community, in your online community. So I just wanted to share that we also kind of had that light bulb moment where we were thinking about just shutting it down. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, what like your friends told you that, and I was thinking that myself. So that was kind of an interesting experience that it sounds like we both kind of had similar.
Yeah. So blogs have a very particular way that they're, priced to sell. I'm curious, how did you figure out like what to sell your business for? How did you know what it was worth?
Yeah, so that's a really tricky question. There's lots of different ways to value your business. And in the end, we did kind of a hybrid approach between our gross revenue and what we thought the market could bear. We did not get our business professionally evaluated. I'm not sure if you did with Root Revel, but in the end, we kind of just looked at what our gross revenue was and then picked a price that we were comfortable with, which is very unofficial, but that is how we did it. How about you? How did you, you said there's an official way to price blogs, so I'm curious to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there's, lots of ways to accomplish the same thing, but in my experience, everybody that I talked to said, well, there's brokers that buy and sell, help people buy and sell websites and blogs. So talk to them, and, you can try to sell it on your own, of course. And so that was also why it took a while. At first, I did try to sell it on my own because brokers take like 10 to 20% commission, depending on the broker. And so that's a big chunk of change. So I tried to sell it myself at first, but it was pretty clear, like there was a lot of tools online that you could get valuations and put in information and stuff. And so in simplest terms, blogs sell based on the last 12 months of revenue on a multiple. So it was like you take your last 12 months of revenue and somewhere between 2 and 5 times that revenue is what you could sell it for. And there's so many variables that would determine whether it's 2 times or 5 times or something like that. But I really struggled with this because I had checked out of Root and Revel so much. Like if, hindsight's 2020, if I had sold it when I first got the idea and I was able to just like list it and get it sold, I think I could have sold it for at least 2 or 3 times what I ended up selling it for. But because it was based on, rolling revenue, as my revenue started to decline, as the business started to decline, and I was totally removed from it. I wasn't spending any time doing anything for the site anymore. And I was always caught in this kind of limbo, scenario of like, well, shoot, do I put more time and energy and effort and maybe money into getting the business back up? But that wasn't just like an easy thing to do, or do I take maybe a lower sale price and just take what I can get and not, spend any more, especially as a new mom in the pandemic. It was like time was very precious. So ultimately I did end up deciding to just do that. But my friend actually gave me, not in this industry at all, a good perspective, because I still ended up selling the blog for multiple 6 figures. So it wasn't like it was nothing. And a lot of people I know were like, again, I didn't even know you could sell blogs. People still don't even know you can make money blogging. So the idea that you could sell something for something like that was, unfathomable. But my friend said, most people, when you like want to change careers or just change direction, like you just get a new job, you leave your old job and you just go to a new job, but you're actually getting paid to start something new. Like somebody is paying you to say, okay, you're bored with this, go on to this next thing and I'll give you money to do it. So once she said it like that, I was like, well, gosh, even $50 would seem like amazing, because that's not, how things normally work. So it's good perspective.
Yeah, I like that perspective a lot. And for us, we sold our business for less than 6 figures, but it in the end, like you said, I'm just glad we were able to get some money out of it. And then also to just see the business, like the bigger thing was to see the business transition on to somebody else who could then continue to take care of our clients and provide the community with a much needed service. So I just felt really good about being able to pass the torch on to the next person who would do a better job than we would, just because I was ready to transition out.
Yeah, for sure. So how did you find a buyer?
So for us, we kind of made a short list of other people that might be in the same industry as us, that might be interested in basically purchasing our client list, because we were a service-based business. So it was basically purchasing like our client list and then providing the services to them, almost like kind of a done for you type of thing. And so we made a list of other vendors or other people that were doing a similar thing, but hadn't like broken into either our location yet. And we actually just reached out with personal letters, and that's how we found the buyer that was wanting to buy our business.
That's amazing.
Yeah. We didn't have to work with a broker. We didn't have to like list it anywhere. We were able to just use some of our warm contacts and get the word out that we were selling our business, and then make those personal invitations to connect more.
Yeah. Like I mentioned, like I originally wanted to try to sell it privately. So I did some things like we used AdThrive as our advertising network on the site. So I went to AdThrive's Facebook group where there's, hundreds of other publishers there, and just said, hey, I'm selling this blog. Here's, what I'm thinking of for it, and just posted it in their Facebook group. And I got a lot of conversations started from that. But I think what was tricky was that it was a lot of just like regular individuals. And so because I was selling it, originally for high six figures, it was like most people don't have $1 million lying around. So that was hard to find a buyer at that price. And then ultimately, I ended up discounting it significantly just because I was like, I just need to sell this and, be done with it. You always kind of get to a point where it's like, you have to measure what your energy is worth and think about more than just the financial cost, but the opportunity cost of spending my time and energy working on this when I really wanted to be somewhere else. So the broker ended up being really helpful for that. And I worked with 2 different brokers, and the first one is a common blog broker. I won't name them by name. And they were great. I mean, they helped a lot, in terms of helping me figure out how to price it and getting it listed and whatnot. And I did have a handful of calls with potential buyers. But what was interesting is that a lot of the buyers I talked to, because at this price point, they were corporations, many of which were run by just like old white men. And it was just not who I imagined selling like a female holistic health website to. So I remember having some conflict, like internal conflict, thinking, do I care who the buyer is, or do I just want to sell the thing? And ultimately none of them made an offer. So I didn't have to really make that decision. But when I did end up selling it to just another individual, and that felt really good to like be able to sell it to somebody that I felt like would take good care of it. And it wasn't just like a commodity. It really meant something to them and whatnot. But I'm curious if both, I guess, if you cared, it sounds like you did a good job, like researching the types of people you would want to buy the business.
Yeah, mostly because we were working with a vulnerable population and providing a service. And so we wanted to make sure that the people that were going to be taking care of our clients had similar values, and we'd feel good about transitioning our business to them. So that was actually a pretty important factor for us personally. Which is why we kind of went the personal approach in reaching out to people who we thought would be a good fit, rather than putting it on like the mass market, because it was really important that our values were in alignment.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And you mentioned, I just had 2 separate thoughts. I'm like, so many questions, which way to go? So I was going to ask if the buyer was important. And then I was also going to ask you, well, it's escaped me, but the next question I had in my mind was, you mentioned like they were buying your client list essentially. And so, I was curious, like when you're buying a service-based business, I know a lot of people would ask me, so like you sold a blog, so like, what do they get? What are you actually selling? So for you, it was the client list. Anything else come with it? And like your name and likeness, did it go with the business? I think that was a hard thing for me too, also, is figuring out how to remove myself from the business in a natural way that didn't leave my existing audience, pissed or wondering what happened, but also made it clear that moving forward, I have nothing to do with anything that, like now, if you go to rootrevel.com, anything on there, like I don't have any say in, I have no control over, it's a totally separate business I have no affiliation with. So kind of making that clear was a little bit tricky.
Yeah, I agree with that. For us also, I just stepped out of the business. And so they were not using our name. They were not using really any of like our internal systems necessarily. But then going back to your question, like what they were really getting, like, yes, they were getting a client list or names or whatever, but they were also getting just like the potential value then of those clients. And so those clients provided, X number of income we had 10 years of income to documented. And so the buyers was really getting then that like future potential of income,
Right.
should they provide obviously the same caliber of service. And then the other piece that we did, that I don't know if you did for Root and Revel, but we are also offering as part of the sale of the business, was to help with the transition. And so we kind of had it outlined like how exactly myself and my business partner were going to help with the transition, what exactly like training we were going to be providing. We were consultants for a year after we sold our business. And so there were some other pieces involved in the sale of the business as well, aside from like just the client list, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And did you have a lawyer to help you like manage the sale? How did you know which things to include and how to write the contract?
I know. I was thinking you were going to ask me that. And I think we did use a lawyer just for the sale, just to do the contract for us. We had a lawyer that we had worked with previously. And so we did use a lawyer for the sale and outlining the contract. And then also I was going to ask you this too, but a lot of people or corporations or corporations probably, but not a lot of people just have that kind of cash laying around. So we did have to be flexible with our buyer. I'm not sure if you did too, but the buyout process was a little longer than originally what we had anticipated, because they actually ended up doing multiple payments so that they could cover the cost of it.
Right.
So we did use a lawyer to just outline all of those things inside the contract, since it wasn't for us just a one-time buyout. I don't know how you did it for Root and Revel.
Yeah, I mean, all of those things are certainly things that can be negotiated. I felt very much like once I'm not involved, I was already used to having, payment plans for different products. And I know people fail their payment plans, and I didn't want to feel like I was chasing money. And so I made my contract say that it was a one-time lump sum payment up front. And the buyer, I don't want to speak for her, but I know like she ended up getting a business loan in order to pay for it. And so, there's ways around it, but certainly if I was more flexible, I could have found, and maybe that would have helped me, sell it sooner if I was more willing um, to do that. I think I felt very much like energetically, I needed to close the chapter like once and for all, and just very completely all at once, rather than having it be more of a drawn out process. But I think because I was already so busy in the other business, and again, pandemic, 2 toddlers, it was like, I just don't have time to, part of the reason I needed to sell was I don't have time to manage 2 businesses. So I think that was an important thing for me, but it's good to note, like all of that stuff can be negotiated. And the broker that I worked with, like she was great. And she sells websites from, some people think like, oh, in order to sell, it must be like $1 million or something. And she's like, no, I've sold websites for $2,000. And like, sometimes it's just getting started. You have a little bit of traffic and somebody else goes, great, you did that work for me. Like, I remember actually, even when I met with the buyer that ended up getting Root and Revel, I asked her why she was interested in Root and Revel instead of just starting her own blog. And she's like, well, I could start my own thing, but it might take me years before I'm really making good money. Or I could just buy a business that's already making good money and be profitable from day one, essentially. And so it's like, oh, that's really smart. I don't know why that never occurred to me. It always feels like you have to start from scratch, but you really don't. And so if you're listening to this and you're either interested in selling, but you think your site is too small or your business is too small, or you're interested in buying, but you think I could never be able to afford something, like there definitely is something for every market.
Yeah, for sure, Kate. So what do you think, what mindset did you need to embody to successfully sell your business?
Yeah, great question. I mean, one of the things that my dad talked to me a lot about, because I think I really struggled with discounting the site, knowing like, it was making multiple 6 figures a year ago in 1 year. So to sell it for much less than that was like, oh, I just feel like I'm walking away from money. And like it, you mentioned like that future income was part of the, it was a factor in how you price the business. And that was really interesting to me too, because my dad he is like an angel investor for lots of different software companies, and he works on the board of software companies too. And so anyway, he's very involved in like getting the buying and selling of businesses and what it takes and everything. And he was saying that they price a lot of their things based on, okay, well, right now, let's say, Twitter, this is a bad example. I'm trying to think of like a common thing. Okay, right now QuickBooks is makes $50,000 a year, but they only have one salesperson. Well, what if you could buy this business for $50,000 a year and hire 10 salespeople? Then could you 10x what what you're currently making? And they're going to factor those kinds of things in. But blogging was really interesting because it was nothing about the future. It didn't matter what the potential could be. It was only what you've done in the last 12 months and not in the last 3 years or the last 10 years or anything. Like, it was very specific to that time period. So the mindset that I had to embody was one of non-emotional attachment, because I think that it was such my baby and I was so like proud of and attached to it. And even though I did want to sell, I remember my dad asking me several times, like, if you took all, I'd be like, I don't know what to do. I have 3 options and I hate all of them. And he said, well, if you took out all emotion, what would you do? And I'm like, oh, option B, that's obvious. This is all just about my own ego and wanting to be able to say, I mean, of course, I'd like the money in my bank account too, but like there was a certain ego attached to like, what if I could say I sold my business for $1 million, and anything short of that felt like a failure. And it was like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think for me, it showed up a little bit different, but I think that's a really important point. You have to take out the emotional attachment and become unattached to it. And it's hard when it is your baby. So for me, it showed up in a different way, because I would tell people I was selling my business and they're like, wait, what do you mean? Like, you're selling people with disabilities? Like, that's really weird. Like, it wasn't commonplace in our industry to be able to sell a business. And so I had to think of it like, well, if I was a CPA, of course I could, sell my business. Like, so I had to like remove the social service component from the business and remove the emotional attachment and just really get to a place of like, I'm outgrowing this. I'm ready to move on. This is a valuable, important service that we provide. And I want to help somebody be able to serve my clients and continue to serve our community, and selling my business really is the best way to do that, and like remove all of the emotional attachment around like all the weird stigmas, if there was any, and just really get to a place of like, come on, like CPAs or lawyers might do this all the time and it'd be totally commonplace and it would be no big deal. So I think I had to get to that place in terms of like detaching myself from that emotional component as well. And then also the other thing I was going to add, Kate, is just like, you have to believe that your business is valuable. Like, if you come at it from a place of like scarcity or like, oh, I hope I can sell my business, like if you don't really believe that it's valuable, then you're probably not going to find a buyer that thinks it's valuable. So I think that's a really important mindset to embody as well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, just like anything, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right. And I feel like that, totally applies here. I think the other thing that came up for me too is thinking more about unattachment. I also had to unattach from whatever happened to especially because Root Revel, it was like a public facing website, like anybody can go and look at it. And so it was like, I have to unattach from, at first, when I was trying to sell it, it was like, what if they run it into the ground, or what if they ruin it, or they do something that I would never do or agree with? And I had to be okay with like, okay, but that's their choice and only they're going to be affected. Like, so that was a mindset I had to kind of reframe. But then interestingly, once I got an offer that I accepted, I kind of had a freak out too. And I called my girlfriend and I'm like, what if they turn it into this amazing business and it becomes a multi-million-dollar business, and then I'll have no part in it, but I built the foundation. Like, it's so hard to just give up the potential of that. And she just said to me, and it always sticks with me, she said, that's not where your abundance comes from anymore. And I was just like, yes, that resonates. Exactly. I have something else that is like filling my heart and lighting me up. And just, I'm so passionate about it. Root and Revel served the purpose it needed to in the season of life that I needed it to. And now my abundance comes from somewhere else, and I can share this abundance with someone else. And that was like a big shift that I didn't see coming. I thought it was all going to be about, what if they ruin it?
Yeah, that's interesting to think of both ways. But I think the important point there is you have to be unattached to the future outcome of whatever happens to your business after you're no longer a part of it anymore.
Yeah.
I think, and that's harder than it sounds, because like you said, there's extremes on either end, and you have to be able to be unattached, and be willing to like not only be unattached, but like be willing to like let the next buyer do their thing with your business however they want to do it, because they're stepping in and taking over the control and the reins. And I think that can be hard sometimes.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes I won't say I've never looked at it, but I really kind of try to not look at it sometimes too, because I think once you start, it's hard, it kind of brings you back into that energy. And I just go like, you know what? I trust that whatever is meant to happen is happening with it. And, occasionally my curiosity gets the best of me, but like, I'm not on the email list. Of course, I'm not on social media anyway, but I just really try to just like trust that, what's meant to happen is happening with it, and walk away.
So what advice do you have for others who are considering selling their business or building a sellable asset, Kate?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is that, I think we're moving away from this a little bit. I kind of hope we're moving away from it a little bit at least, which is especially because as a blog, it was almost synonymous. It wasn't, but people think it is, with like being an influencer. So it was very much about me and who I am, what I like, where I live, what I buy, what I eat, what I wear, like all those types of things. It was so focused on me, and you can't sell you at the end, like, unless I was willing to have somebody come in and pretend to be me, which I was never going to do. So, so my biggest learning was not to make everything so centrally focused on you as a single person, and that you can still have some personal story woven in, but like it doesn't have to be you. So like I wouldn't name, if I were to launch another blog, I wouldn't name it my name, or I wouldn't make every photo a picture of me. I would incorporate lots of other people's faces, and maybe not even my own at all. I think I would just bring in other voices, or maybe even have a fake persona that I was using if I felt like that was really, that's what some of the brokers would tell me, like, so what are they going to do? Some buyers wanted to keep the name Kate on Root and Revel. And I was like, no, I'm not involved. I can't have people thinking that, what if they publish something that I really disagreed with, and then people think that that's me. And they were just saying, oh, it happens all the time. Like half the blogs out there, which I don't know if this is actually true, probably not, but that there are blogs out there that are run by fake personas. And so that was, I don't know, if I love that idea, but I guess I'm just saying like, there's other ways to build a business than to make it centrally about you. So that was one of the biggest lessons I learned, and something I'm definitely doing more, even in this business, is like having other people on the podcast and other people on the team, and really trying to amplify other people's voices more. And, right now I'm like, I would never sell this business. This is the best, but who knows?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest advice I'd give to somebody is just how important it is to have good systems and good documentation, because you can't sell like a jumbled up mess and just, I mean, you maybe could try, but you can't really like hand over a jumbled up, disorganized mess. So just the more systems you can have in place and the more documentation, the more you can like clearly document your income that you're generating. Those are all going to be things that are going to help you sell your business. So that would be my piece of advice, is like, operate from day one like you're going to sell your business, and set your systems up and your documentation up. Even if you think you never are going to sell it, just have it set up from the beginning and have it be organized, so that you have the option of selling it in the future if you should choose to do that.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great advice. And it's not like it would ever hurt you to be systematic in your current business, even if you never sold it, right? What was like the biggest surprise for you in all of the process?
That's a good question. I think it was, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I think transition is hard. And it was like in my mind, I think because I was already thinking about selling the business for a while, I was already at a place where I was like, this is what I'm doing. I'm unattached. I'm moving on to the next direction. But to be fair, like it was the first time like my clients or my community or my employees had heard about the business selling. And so I think I was surprised at how difficult the transition was, how difficult it ended up being, where in my mind it's already like a done deal. I'd already like mentally prepared myself, and I didn't really think about how much time other people would need to prepare themselves for the idea as well. So I think it was a little more emotional. The transition was a little more emotional than I was thinking it was going to be. What about for you?
Yeah.
What was the biggest surprise?
Yeah, it's interesting because in some ways I could say the opposite. Like I think the ease of the transition, there was a lot of prep work to lead up to it. So I don't mean it was just like, oh, 5 minutes and we were done, but it actually was a fairly smooth process to just close. I think one of the things that surprised me the most was how similar it is to just buying and selling a house. Like it was very much just like, this is the asset, this is what it's worth, this is what you get when you purchase it. And then at the end, like you don't have the keys to come back to your old house anymore. And like you don't have control over what color they paint it and, any of that. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised if control was a hard thing for me to let go of, but it is hard when you just like, you don't have control and even just of other people's, emotions and how they handle different situations and whatnot. So, but I think my biggest surprise was, yeah, just how similar it was to a house. I think when I told people I was selling my business, everybody's just like, what does that mean? I don't understand. And again, like, what are you even selling? And I don't think I actually ended up answering that question, which was for the blog. It was like, well, we sold, the domain, the URL. We sold the social media accounts and the email list and the WordPress access and some other software, access. Of course, they take over like paying the bills on things, but it was pretty much like, here's the passwords for everything. And now it's yours and I'm out.
And they got all the content as well, correct? Like all the
Yes. All previous content.
Yeah.
So, and that's again, like it doesn't have my name on it anymore. And I did go through and I removed any pictures of myself and especially of my children. So there's some photos where like I'm kind of blurred out in the background, but it's not like an obvious face. If you didn't know me, you wouldn't know it was me. But that was a very time consuming process because it was 6 years old and hundreds of posts and my face was on every one of them. So that was a process for sure. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we did it. I'm super curious to hear what everybody thinks of this episode. It's very different from anything we've done before and even the topic. So leave us a review or a comment on the blog post and let us know what you think. If you have other questions, we can do a part 2 and see what else comes up for y'all. I'm sure buying and selling a business is probably not something you would think you would be doing, but you never know what can happen. So I hope this gives you some perspective that'll help you either way. Any parting words, Rachel?
Nope. Just thanks so much for having me, Kate. I really appreciated being on today and sharing my experience. And I hope to see all of you inside the incubator.
Yay, me too. Bye, y'all. Oops. I was hitting end meeting.